Check the plate again. Those were the only 4 words Dr. Naomi Brooks gave the sheriff, and somehow they landed harder than any shout could have. The silver handcuffs in Sheriff Walter Harlan's right hand stopped inches behind her back, frozen in the damp afternoon air beside pump number 6 at Collins Gas, where the rain had turned the blacktop into a mirror and every glowing red and yellow light reflected beneath their feet like the whole station was holding its breath. Around them, people stood with coffee cups, grocery bags, and half-filled tanks, pretending not to stare while staring at everything. A mother pulled her little boy closer. A truck driver stopped twisting the cap back onto his gas tank. Behind the window, young Evan Miller stood at the register with one hand still hovering over the emergency button, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the scene outside. Naomi did not move. She stood beside the black GMC Yukon, calm in a dark wool coat, rain beating on her shoulders, her hands resting where the sheriff had ordered them to be placed, not because she was afraid, but because she understood something he did not. Every second mattered. Every word mattered. Every camera mattered. Sheriff Harlan leaned closer, his badge shining under the canopy lights, his jaw tight with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned in his own county. "Ma'am, I told you not to get clever with me," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "People like you don't drive vehicles like this without a story." The words slipped into the air and changed it. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. Even the rain seemed softer for a moment, like it was ashamed to touch the ground where that sentence had fallen. Naomi slowly turned her head just enough for him to see the side of her face, her expression steady, her eyes dark and unreadable. "Then read the story correctly," she said. Deputy Ryan Cole, standing near the cruiser, looked down at the sheriff's tablet again. He had already typed in the plate once, then twice. The screen had not changed. Restricted vehicle. State authorization. Internal affairs hold. His thumb hovered over the display as if refusing to accept what his own eyes were telling him. The SUV was not stolen. It was protected. The owner was not some random woman passing through Grayford. Her name carried a clearance warning that no county sheriff was supposed to ignore. "Sheriff," Cole said, his voice almost swallowed by the rain. Harlan did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Naomi, because pride is often louder than evidence. "Not now," he snapped. But Cole tried again, softer this time, shaken. "Sir, you need to see this." That was when Naomi finally turned all the way around. No anger, no fear, no begging, just a stillness so complete it made everyone else seem small. The handcuffs lowered slightly in Harlan's grip. His face tightened. Somewhere above them, the security camera blinked red. Somewhere behind the glass, Evan remembered that it had been recording the entire time. And somewhere in Naomi's coat pocket, beneath a folded gas receipt and a sealed state envelope, her phone buzzed for the 3rd time with the same caller ID, State Oversight Office. Harlan glanced at the SUV, then at the plate, then at the deputy, and for the first time that afternoon, the man who had accused her of stealing began to understand that he had been the one walking into a trap. But to know how one quiet woman at a gas station became the worst mistake of Sheriff Walter Harlan's career, you have to go back 47 minutes earlier, before the cuffs, before the crowd, before the rain turned the pavement silver, to the moment Dr. Naomi Brooks crossed the county line with a sealed file on the passenger seat and a truth powerful enough to bring an entire sheriff's office to its knees. 47 minutes earlier, Dr. Naomi Brooks crossed into Harlan County with both hands steady on the wheel and the quiet weight of a sealed investigation file resting on the passenger seat beside her. The sky over northern Georgia had turned the color of wet steel, low clouds dragging over the pine trees, rain ticking softly against the windshield of the black GMC Yukon as the county line sign passed on her right. "Welcome to Harlan County. Population 28,000. Naomi read it once and kept driving. She had visited places like this before. Small towns with clean courthouse lawns, faded flags outside municipal buildings, and old stories buried under polite smiles. On the surface, Grayford looked harmless. A diner with a hand-painted breakfast sign. A hardware store with rocking chairs out front. A church bell tower rising above the rooftops. But Naomi had learned years ago that some towns did not hide their secrets in dark alleys. They hid them in offices with framed certificates, in patrol logs that did not match body camera files, in complaints marked unresolved until the people who filed them finally stopped calling. Her phone rested in the cup holder, silent for now, though she already knew who would be calling before the afternoon ended. State oversight had warned her twice not to go in alone, but Naomi had not come to make an arrest or start a confrontation. She had come to observe. That was always the first rule. Watch what people do when they believe nobody important is watching. On the passenger seat, the thick manila envelope bore 3 printed words across the front in black ink. Harlan County Misconduct Review. Inside were witness statements, traffic stop records, internal memos, settlement notices, and a pattern that had become too clear to ignore. Different names, different dates. Same story. Black drivers stopped for reasons that shifted after the fact. Searches requested with no clear cause. Vehicles questioned as stolen, borrowed, rented, or suspicious, even when registration proved otherwise. And at the center of too many reports was one name, Sheriff Walter Harlan. Naomi did not hate men like Harlan. Hate was too loud, too messy, too easy to use against you. She studied them. She listened to the rhythm of their certainty, the way they turned personal suspicion into official language, the way they made ordinary people feel guilty for standing where they had every right to stand. She had built her career on patience, not outrage. Patience had taken her from a law school classroom in Atlanta to the state attorney general's oversight division. Patience had taught her to let careless people speak long enough to reveal themselves. The Yukon rolled past a row of mailboxes and a closed produce stand, its tires hissing over the wet Tulane road. Naomi glanced at the fuel gauge. Less than a quarter tank. She had planned to meet attorney Grace Whitmore at the county records office in under an hour, but the rain was getting heavier and the nearest station appeared on the navigation screen just 3 miles ahead. Collins Gas sat at the edge of Grayford where the highway bent toward town, a low brick building under a wide yellow canopy, its lights flickering in the wet afternoon. Naomi pulled in beside pump number 6, parked carefully, and turned off the engine. For a moment, she stayed still, watching raindrops slide down the glass like thin silver lines. Then she looked at the envelope on the seat, touched 2 fingers to its edge, and whispered to herself, one step at a time. She had no idea that inside the store, a young cashier was about to notice her kindness, an old owner was about to recognize the SUV, and a sheriff who believed the county belonged to him was less than 10 minutes away from proving the entire file right. Inside Collins Gas, the air smelled like burnt coffee, motor oil, and cinnamon gum, the kind of ordinary American roadside mix that made the place feel older than it probably was. A small bell above the door gave a tired jingle as Naomi stepped in from the rain, brushing a few drops from the sleeve of her dark coat. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A local weather report played softly from a television mounted in the corner. Behind the counter, Evan Miller looked up from sorting lottery tickets and gave her a polite nod that seemed almost relieved, as though kindness from a stranger could briefly interrupt the heaviness of the day. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. "Pump 6. Naomi smiled lightly. "Yes, please. $40 on 6, and a black coffee if it is fresh enough to survive the weather." Evan glanced at the pot, then made a face that told the truth before his words did. Fresh enough might be generous. For the first time that afternoon, Naomi almost laughed. "Then I will take my chances with bottled water." It was a small exchange, harmless, human, but even that small warmth did not go unnoticed. Near the back aisle, a man in a camouflage cap paused in front of the beef jerky rack and looked toward the window, then toward Naomi, then back to the black Yukon outside. Beside the soda cooler, an older woman lowered her phone just enough to watch without seeming to watch. At the far end of the counter, Martha Collins, the owner, stood with a clipboard in her hand, her silver hair pinned tightly, her eyes sharper than her tired posture suggested. Martha saw the vehicle first. Then she saw Naomi. Something uneasy flickered across her face. Not suspicion exactly, but recognition of a pattern she had witnessed too many times in the same parking lot. Naomi noticed all of it. She noticed the glances that stayed half a second too long. She noticed the sudden quiet after she spoke. She noticed how Evan's friendliness became cautious the moment he sensed other people watching him be friendly. This was not new to her. It was never new. In airports, hotel lobbies, gated neighborhoods, courthouse elevators, and government offices, Naomi had felt that invisible question press against her skin before anyone said a word. "Why are you here? How did you get that? Who let you in?" Imagine standing in a place as simple as a gas station, holding a bottle of water and a debit card, while strangers silently decide whether your presence needs an explanation. Naomi had spent years learning not to shrink under that gaze. She placed her card in the reader, accepted the receipt, and tucked it neatly into her coat pocket beside her state identification. "Roads getting bad south of town?" she asked Evan. "A little slick," he said, "especially past the bridge. You heading toward Grayford? I have a meeting there." Evan nodded, but before he could answer, Martha's voice cut in softly from the side. "Then be careful who you meet." The words were quiet. Too quiet. Naomi turned toward her. Martha looked down at her clipboard as if she had not meant to say anything at all. For a moment, the hum of the coolers filled the space between them. Naomi did not press. People in towns like Grayford often carried warnings the way they carried house keys, hidden in plain sight, only offered when fear loosened its grip for a second. Outside, a white county cruiser rolled slowly past the front windows, its tires whispering through the wet lot. Evan saw it and stopped moving. Martha's hand tightened around the clipboard. The man in the camouflage cap suddenly became very interested in a bag of chips. Naomi followed their eyes to the cruiser as it turned near the air pump and parked without pulling into a marked space. The driver's door opened. A broad-shouldered man in a tan sheriff's uniform stepped out beneath the gray sky, adjusting the brim of his hat as if the rain itself had no right to touch him. The entire store changed before he even reached the door. Conversations died. Shoulders lowered. Evan swallowed. Martha set the clipboard down with care. Naomi stood still, water bottle in hand, watching through the glass as Sheriff Walter Harlan walked toward Collins Gas like a man entering a room that already belonged to him. Sheriff Walter Harlan did not hurry when he entered Collins Gas. Men like him rarely did. The bell above the door rang once, sharp and small, and then the whole store seemed to arrange itself around his presence. Evan straightened behind the counter. Martha lowered her eyes to the register. The man in the camouflage cap gave a nervous nod, the kind of nod people give when they want to be remembered as cooperative. Harlan's boots left dark half-moons of rainwater across the tile as he walked in, his tin uniform pressed clean, his badge bright, his face carrying the tired confidence of someone who had spent years confusing fear with respect. "Martha," he said without warmth. "Sheriff," she answered. Naomi stood near the counter with her receipt in one hand and the bottle of water in the other. She felt his attention land on her before his eyes fully settled. It moved from her coat to her shoes, from her face to the keys in her hand, then through the front window, toward the black Yukon parked at pump number 6. A small shift crossed his expression, so quick most people would have missed it. Naomi did not. Harlan turned to Evan. "Who came in with that sport utility vehicle?" Evan blinked. "Pump 6. I did not ask for the pump number." The sheriff's voice stayed calm, but the room tightened around it. "I asked who came in with it." Evan glanced at Naomi, then back at Harlan. "She did, sir." Harlan slowly turned, as if the answer had confirmed something he already believed. "That yours?" Naomi met his eyes. "Yes." "You sure about that?" The question sat in the air with a smile hidden underneath it. Naomi placed the receipt into her coat pocket. "I am very sure." He looked out again at the Yukon, then back at her. "Expensive vehicle for someone just passing through. I was not aware there was a price limit for buying fuel in this county." Evan's mouth tightened like he wanted to smile, but fear stopped it before it could form. Harlan noticed. His eyes cut to the young cashier, and Evan looked down immediately. Then the sheriff stepped closer to Naomi, not enough to touch her, just enough to make the distance feel deliberate. "You got identification? For buying water? For driving that vehicle?" Naomi held his stare for one beat, then another. The old rhythm had begun. Suspicion first. Authority second. Explanation never. She reached into her coat slowly, careful, controlled, and removed her driver's license. Harlan took it without saying thank you. He looked at the card, but Naomi could tell he was not really reading it. His mind had already written a different story. "Dr. Naomi Brooks," he said, making the title sound like an accusation. "Atlanta address." "Correct. Long way from home. A little under 2 hours, depending on traffic." He tilted his head. "And what brings you to Grayford?" "A meeting." "With who?" "That is not relevant to a traffic or fuel purchase." The silence that followed was thin and dangerous. Not loud. Not dramatic. Worse. It was the kind of silence people recognized in places where one person had power and everyone else had learned to survive it. Harlan handed the license back, but his fingers did not release it right away. "You always answer simple questions like a lawyer?" Naomi gently took the license from his hand. "Only when simple questions are being used for something else." The man in the camouflage cap turned away completely. Martha closed her eyes for half a second. Harlan smiled then, but there was no humor in it. He looked through the window at the Yukon again and spoke as if Naomi were no longer part of the conversation. "Evan, call on that plate." Evan froze. "Sheriff, you heard me." Naomi's voice remained even. "There is no reason to run my plate." Harlan looked back at her, and now the mask slipped just enough for everyone to see what lived underneath. "Ma'am, around here we check things that do not look right." He did not say the rest out loud. He did not have to. The store heard it anyway. Naomi slid her license back into her pocket, her face calm, her pulse steady, her eyes fixed on the man who had just stepped exactly where the file said he would. "Then you should be very careful," she said softly, "because sometimes the thing that does not look right is not the vehicle. It is the person doing the checking." For one breath, no one inside Collins' gas moved. Sheriff Harlan's smile faded slowly, not because Naomi had raised her voice, but because she had not. Calm always unsettled men who expected fear. He stared at her as though trying to decide whether she was brave, foolish, or something worse for him. Then he turned toward the window and pointed at the black Yukon. "Step outside." Naomi looked at him, then at the rain sliding down the glass. "Am I being detained?" Harlan gave a small laugh through his nose. "You can call it whatever helps you cooperate." "That is not an answer." His eyes hardened. "It is the only answer you are getting right now." Evan's fingers hovered near the register. Martha's face tightened, and for a moment she looked like she might speak, but the habit of fear closed her mouth before the words could escape. Naomi placed the water bottle back on the counter, slow and deliberate, as if refusing to let him set the rhythm. Then she walked toward the door with the sheriff behind her, every step measured, every sound too clear. The bell rang again. Rain met her immediately, cold against her cheeks, soft against her coat. Under the canopy, the lights buzzed over pump number 6 while the Yukon sat perfectly still, its dark paint shining with thin streams of water. Harlan stopped a few feet. Behind her, "Hands where I can see them." Naomi turned slightly. "Sheriff, I have given you identification. The vehicle is registered. There is no complaint, no victim, and no probable cause. You do not get to lecture me about probable cause in my county." There it was. My county. Not the county. Not this jurisdiction. My county. The words told Naomi more than his report ever could. A pickup truck slowed near the entrance. Two customers under the awning stopped pretending to mind their own business. Inside, faces gathered near the front window. Harlan's voice grew louder, shaped now for the audience. "We have had several reports of luxury vehicles moving through this corridor under suspicious circumstances." "Several reports from whom?" "You asking questions does not make you innocent." "No," Naomi said, steady as stone. "Facts do." His jaw worked. He gestured toward the hood of the Yukon. "Place your hands on the vehicle." A quiet ripple moved through the people watching. Not outrage. Not yet. Something more familiar and more painful. Recognition. Naomi looked at the hood, then at Harlan. The rain ran from the edge of the canopy behind him like a curtain. "You are making this public by choice. You made it public when you drove in here with a vehicle that does not add up." "Does not add up to whom?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping just enough to sound personal. "To common sense." Naomi held his eyes. She could feel the phones now, little black rectangles lifting from pockets and windows. She could see Evan through the glass, frozen behind the counter. She could see Martha standing beside him, one hand pressed against her chest, remembering something Naomi did not yet know. Imagine being told to prove what is already yours, not because the paperwork is missing, not because the law has spoken, but because someone with a badge decided your dignity was optional. Naomi placed both hands gently on the hood, not in surrender, in documentation. Her palms touched the cool, wet metal. Above her, the security camera blinked red. To her left, a customer's phone was recording. Behind her, Sheriff Harlan began speaking into his radio. "Dispatch, this is Harlan. I need a plate check on a black GMC Yukon at Collins Gas. Possible stolen vehicle, possible false identification." The phrase landed hard. Possible stolen vehicle. Possible false identification. Not truth. Not evidence. Just suspicion dressed up in official language. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second and breathed in through her nose. She did not argue. She did not turn around. She let him say it all. Every word. Every assumption. Every mistake. Because somewhere in the state system, that plate was about to open a door Sheriff Walter Harlan could not close. Deputy Ryan Cole arrived less than 3 minutes after Harlan called in the plate, his cruiser sliding into the far side of the lot with its lights off and its windshield streaked with rain. He was 29, maybe 30, with a clean uniform, nervous eyes, and the kind of face that still had not learned how to hide every thought before it reached the surface. Naomi noticed that immediately. Some officers walked into a scene looking for control. Cole walked in looking for the truth and hoping it would not cost him too much. Harlan did not give him time to ask questions. Run the plate yourself, the sheriff said, nodding toward the Yukon. Dispatch is taking too long. Cole glanced at Naomi, still standing with her hands resting on the hood, then at the small crowd gathered under the canopy and behind the store window. What is the situation? Possible stolen vehicle. Possible false identification. Driver is being evasive. Naomi turned her head slightly. I answered every lawful question. Harlan's eyes flashed. Nobody asked you to speak. The words were sharp, but Naomi heard what sat beneath them. Panic had not arrived yet, but irritation had. Irritation was usually the first crack. Cole moved back to his cruiser and typed the plate into the mounted computer. Rain tapped the roof above him. The screen loaded slowly, the little spinning icon turning while Harlan stood outside performing certainty for the witnesses. You see this all the time, Harlan said loudly, as if teaching a class nobody had signed up for. Out-of-county tags, expensive vehicle, driver gives fancy answers, hopes nobody checks. The details. Naomi did not move. She watched his reflection in the wet hood of the Yukon, distorted by raindrops, badge stretched into a broken shape. You could have read the registration when I offered it. I said I am handling it. No, she said quietly. You are revealing it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think that calm act makes you look important? Naomi turned just enough to meet his eyes. No, I think your assumptions make you careless. Inside the store, Evan's breathing felt trapped in his throat. He had seen Sheriff Harlan stop people before. He had watched him turn small questions into public lessons, watched drivers leave shaken, watched Martha quietly save security footage that nobody ever asked for because everyone already knew what would happen if they did. But this woman was different. She did not plead. She did not perform innocence for people who had already doubted her. She stood like someone waiting for a clock to finish counting down. At the cruiser, Cole's computer finally chimed. He leaned closer to the screen. His expression changed so fast that even Martha saw it through the glass. First confusion, then recognition, then fear. The vehicle record opened with a restricted banner across the top. State Internal Affairs. Protected Assignment Vehicle. Do not detain without authorization from State Oversight Office. Contact supervisor immediately. Cole read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition might make the words less dangerous. Beneath the plate information was Naomi's name, title, and clearance designation. Dr. Naomi Elaine Brooks, Head of State Internal Affairs Investigations. Active Oversight Operation. Cole slowly looked through the windshield at the woman standing by the hood, then at Sheriff Harlan, who was still talking, still building a case out of air. Sheriff, Cole called, but his voice cracked around the word. Harlan did not turn. What? Cole stepped out of the cruiser with the tablet in his hand. You need to see this. Just tell me if it is stolen. Cole swallowed. It is not stolen. The crowd shifted. A whisper passed near pump 3. Harlan's shoulders stiffened. Then check the identification. Again, Cole looked down at the tablet, then back up, and whatever loyalty he had to the badge was now colliding with the truth on the screen. The identification matches. Harlan turned slowly, rain gathering on the brim of his hat. For the first time, his voice lost its smooth edge. Matches what? Cole hesitated, and that hesitation told Naomi the moment had arrived. Her phone buzzed again inside her coat pocket. The state office was calling for the third time. Naomi lifted her hands from the hood, not fast, not defiantly, just with quiet authority, and faced the sheriff fully. Check the plate again, she said. And Deputy Cole, pale under the canopy lights, realized that Sheriff Walter Harlan had not stopped the suspect. He had stopped the investigation sent to expose him. The rain had softened into a fine mist by the time Sheriff Walter Harlan finally looked at Deputy Cole's tablet, but the air under the canopy felt heavier than before. He took one step closer, not reaching for it. Not yet, as if the screen itself had become something dangerous. Cole held it out with both hands. "Sir," he said quietly, "the vehicle is flagged through the state." Harlan stared at him. "Flagged how?" Cole lowered his voice even more, but the silence around them made every word travel. "Restricted assignment. State Internal Affairs. Protected vehicle." Something moved through the crowd, not sound exactly, but awareness. The kind that passes from face to face when people realize the story they were told is beginning to fall apart. Harlan's eyes cut toward Naomi. She stood beside the Yukon now with her hands at her sides, rain shining on the shoulders of her coat, her expression calm enough to make his anger look unsteady. "That does not mean anything," Harlan said. "It means exactly what it says," Naomi replied. "This vehicle is registered to a state oversight operation." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Convenient." "No," Naomi said. "Documented." Cole swallowed and scrolled down the screen. "There is a contact instruction, Sheriff. It says we are supposed to call the State Oversight Office before taking any action." Harlan turned on him so sharply that Cole stepped back half an inch. "I decide what action gets taken in this county." Naomi's eyes did not leave him. That sentence may become part of the record. For the first time, Harlan seemed to notice the phones. The customer near pump 3 recording openly. Evan behind the glass with the store camera monitor glowing beside him. Martha Collins standing still with years of fear and memory written across her face. The red blink of the security camera above the door. Truth had a way of multiplying when someone arrogant gave it enough witnesses. Harlan lowered his voice. "Who are you?" Naomi reached slowly into her coat, and every person watching seemed to hold one breath. She did not pull out a weapon. She did not make a dramatic motion. She removed a black leather credential wallet, opened it, and held it where the sheriff could read it clearly. Dr. Naomi Elaine Brooks, Head of State Internal Affairs Investigations. The words did not explode. They landed. Heavy, clean, final. Deputy Cole looked down. Evan's mouth parted behind the window. Martha closed her eyes, but this time it did not look like fear. It looked like relief arriving too late and right on time. Harlan stared at the credentials, then at her face, trying to force the world back into the shape it had held 5 minutes earlier. "You should have identified yourself." Naomi let the wallet stay open. "I identified myself when you asked. You chose not to read past your assumptions." His jaw tightened. "You set me up." "No, Sheriff." I stopped for gas. The simplicity of it struck harder than an accusation. Naomi lowered the credential wallet, then reached into her coat again and removed the sealed envelope from the passenger seat through the open driver's door. The black ink on the front was visible now to Harlan, to Cole, to anyone close enough to see. Harlan County Misconduct Review. Harlan's face changed. Not completely. Men like him rarely gave fear the dignity of being obvious. But something drained from his eyes, something old and certain. "You have no authority to investigate my office without notification." Naomi's voice remained steady. "Your office was notified 6 weeks ago through the county attorney. Your office failed to comply with document requests. Your office also reported missing body camera files from 4 separate traffic stops, 3 of which involved black drivers accused of vehicle theft without charges being filed." The words were precise. No shouting, no insult, just a door opening onto a room Harlan had thought was locked forever. Cole looked at his sheriff as if seeing him from a new distance. Harlan glanced toward the road, perhaps expecting support, perhaps hoping the town itself would rise to protect him. But the town was silent. Then, from beyond the gas station entrance, headlights appeared through the mist. One black sedan, then another, then a third. They turned in slowly, tires whispering over wet pavement, and parked beside the far curb. A woman in a navy suit stepped out first, holding a folder under one arm. Attorney Grace Whitmore had arrived, and the moment Harlan saw the state seal on her credentials, his hand fell away from the cuffs completely. Naomi looked at him, not with triumph, not with cruelty, but with the exhausted dignity of someone who had waited for the truth to catch up. "Sheriff Harlan," she said, "I did not come to Grayford to argue with you. I came because people in this county have been telling the truth for years, and someone in your office kept calling it attitude, confusion, or noncompliance. Today, you said it in front of cameras. Attorney Grace Whitmore did not raise her voice when she crossed the wet pavement toward pump number 6. She did not need to. The two investigators who followed her carried folders sealed in clear evidence sleeves, and the state emblem on their credentials did more to quiet the gas station than any shouted order could have. Sheriff Harlan stood beside his cruiser with the cuffs still in his hand, no longer lifted, no longer useful, just a piece of metal catching the canopy light. Naomi watched his fingers tighten around them, then loosen, as though he was only now realizing that tools of authority become very small when the truth arrives with paperwork. Grace stopped beside Naomi and gave her one brief look, the kind that asked whether she was all right without making her answer in front of everyone. Naomi gave a slight nod. That was enough. Grace turned to Harlan. Sheriff Walter Harlan, I am Attorney Grace Whitmore from the State Oversight Office. As of this moment, you are instructed to cease all contact with Dr. Brooks and preserve all records related to this stop, including radio communication, dispatch logs, body camera footage, vehicle camera footage, and written notes. Harlan's face hardened. This was a routine inquiry. Naomi looked toward the store window, where Evan stood beside the monitor showing 4 camera angles of the lot. Routine does not usually require a stolen vehicle report after registration has been offered. Grace opened her folder. Nor does it usually include refusal to follow a restricted vehicle alert. Deputy Cole lowered his eyes. He knew that part was true. Everyone under the canopy knew it. The lie had no place left to stand. Harlan shifted his weight, trying to recover the posture that had carried him through years of unquestioned power. You people come in here from Atlanta and think you understand this county. The phrase left his mouth before he could dress it up. You people. It hung there, plain and ugly, surrounded by rain, gasoline fumes, and the soft buzz of fluorescent light. Naomi did not flinch. Grace simply wrote something on the top page of her folder. That small motion seemed to frighten Harlan more than any argument could have. Deputy Cole, Grace said, please secure your body camera file and the cruiser computer log from the beginning of this encounter. Cole looked at Harlan, then at Naomi, then at Grace. The choice in front of him was not dramatic. It was quiet. It was professional. It was the kind of choice that decides who a person becomes when nobody can pretend they did not know better. Yes, ma'am, he said. Harlan turned on him. Cole. The deputy paused, but he did not step back. Sheriff, the alert was clear. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. The crowd heard them, and something shifted again. Not chaos. Not celebration. Just a release of breath that had been held for too long. Martha Collins came out from behind the glass door holding a small flash drive in a trembling hand. Her voice shook, but it did not break. I have footage from today, she said. And from other days, if anyone finally wants to see it. Harlan's eyes snapped toward her. For years, that look might have been enough to silence her. Not this time. Evan stepped beside her, holding the store phone. I already backed up the camera feed, he said. All 4 angles. Naomi looked at the two of them, and for the first time that afternoon, a trace of sadness crossed her face. Not because they had spoken, but because it had taken this much for them to feel safe enough to do so. Grace accepted the flash drive carefully and handed it to one of the investigators. Thank you, Mrs. Collins. Harlan's voice dropped low. You do not know what you are doing. Martha's eyes glistened. I think I finally do. The words reached the crowd like a match touching dry paper. A man near pump 3 lowered his phone and said he had video too. The truck driver said he had heard the stolen vehicle call from the beginning. The older woman from the soda cooler stepped forward and admitted she had seen other stops in the same lot. Other drivers questioned the same way. Other people leaving with their hands shaking and their dignity left behind on the pavement. One by one, the silence Harlan had counted on began to betray him. Naomi stood beneath the canopy, listening. She did not smile. This was not victory in the way people imagine it. It was heavier than that. It was the sound of a town remembering that fear had never been the same thing as law. Grace looked at Harlan and spoke with clean finality. Sheriff Harlan, pending formal review, you are relieved from active field authority for this incident and for failure to comply with an active state oversight directive. The cuffs slipped from his hand onto the front seat of his cruiser with a dull metallic sound. No one moved. No one needed to. The badge on his chest was still there, But for the first time all afternoon, it looked less like power and more like evidence. By the time the rain stopped, the sky over Collins Gas had turned a pale gray, and the puddles beneath pump number 6 reflected a scene nobody in Grayford would forget. Sheriff Walter Harlan stood beside his cruiser without the easy command he had carried into the lot less than an hour earlier. His badge was still pinned to his chest. His hat was still straight. His uniform was still clean. But something invisible had been removed from him in front of everyone. The belief that power meant never having to answer. Attorney Grace Whitmore spoke with the investigators near the black sedans, while Deputy Ryan Cole transferred the cruiser logs, his hands moving carefully, his face tense but resolved. Martha Collins stood under the edge of the canopy with Evan beside her, both of them watching years of fear begin to loosen its grip. People who had once looked away now looked directly at the sheriff. Not with hatred, not with excitement, with recognition. That was worse for him. Hatred could be dismissed. Recognition could not. Naomi walked to the driver's side of the Yukon and opened the door, but she did not get in. Not yet. She reached across the seat, picked up the sealed envelope, and handed it to Grace, who placed it with the other evidence. The county records office can wait, Grace said quietly. Naomi looked toward Harlan. No, she answered. I think the county records office just became more important. Harlan heard her. His mouth tightened, but no words came. For a man who had filled the afternoon with accusations, commands, and warnings, silence seemed to fit him poorly. Naomi stepped toward him, stopping at a respectful distance, close enough that he could hear her without the crowd needing to. Her voice was not angry. That almost made it harder to bear. You accused me before you investigated. You dismissed my documents before you read them. You turned a fuel stop into a public lesson because you thought the badge gave you the right to decide who belonged. Harlan looked away toward the highway. Cars passed in both directions, their tires whispering over wet asphalt. Ordinary life moving on as if his world had not just shifted under his feet. Naomi continued. The law was never yours to use as a weapon. He finally looked at her then, and for the first time, there was no smirk, no lesson, no performance for the town. Only the face of a man hearing the truth in a language he could not control. You do not know what this job is like, he said, but the sentence sounded tired before it was finished. Naomi held his gaze. I know what accountability looks like, and I know how many people never got this many witnesses. That was the line that settled over the lot. The truck driver lowered his eyes. The older woman near the soda cooler pressed her lips together. Martha wiped one tear quickly, almost angrily, as though she refused to let it become a spectacle. Naomi turned back to the Yukon. Evan stepped forward just a little. Dr. Brooks? She paused. I am sorry, he said, his voice small but sincere. I should have said something sooner. Naomi looked at him, and the softness in her face returned for a moment. You said something when it mattered. Now keep saying it. He nodded, and something in that nod looked like a young man choosing who he wanted to become. A few minutes later, Naomi started the engine. The Yukon's headlights glowed against the wet pavement. Before pulling away, she looked once more at the station, at the cameras, at the people, at the sheriff standing beside a cruiser that no longer felt like a throne. She had not shouted. She had not threatened. She had not needed revenge. The truth had done what truth does when it is finally allowed to breathe. As she drove toward Grayford, the sealed road shining ahead of her, the story she carried was no longer only in a folder. It was in every phone, every camera, every witness who had decided that silence was no longer safe. He accused her of stealing a car, but by sunset, everyone understood he had been taking something far worse for years. Dignity, trust, and the right to be seen as innocent before being judged. And that day, at a small gas station on the edge of town, justice did not arrive with thunder. It arrived quietly, wearing rain on its shoulders and carrying receipts.